The White Heron. Hey, for my CC Challenge friends, this appears in Words Aptly Spoken. The woods were already filled with shadows one June evening, just before 8 o'clock, though a bright sunset still glimmered faintly among the trunks of the trees. A little girl was driving home her cow, a plodding, dilatory, provoking creature in her behavior, but a valued companion for all that. They were going away from whatever light there was and striking deep into the woods. But their feet were familiar with the path, and it was no matter whether their eyes could see it or not. There was hardly a night the summer through when the old cow could be found waiting at the pasture bars. On the contrary, it was her greatest pleasure to hide herself away among the high huckleberry bushes, and though she wore a loud bell, she had made the discovery that if one stood perfectly still, it would not ring. So Sylvia had to hunt for her until she found her and call, "Cow, cow," with never an answering moo until her childish patience was quite spent. If the creature had not given good milk and plenty of it, the case would have seemed very different to her owners. Besides, Sylvia had all the time there was and very little use to make of it. Sometimes in pleasant weather it was a consolation to look upon the cow's pranks as an intelligent attempt to play hide and seek. And, as the child had no playmates, she lent herself to this amusement with a good deal of zest. Though this chase had been so long that the wary animal herself had given an unusual signal of her whereabouts, Sylvia had only laughed when she came upon Mistress Mooley at the swamp side and urged her affectionately homeward with a twig of birch leaves. The old cow was not inclined to wander farther. She even turned in the right direction for once as they left the pasture, and stepped along the road at a good pace. She was quite ready to be milked now, and seldom stopped to browse. Sylvia wondered what her grandmother would say because they were so late. It was a great while since she had left home at 5:30, but everybody knew the difficulty of making this errand a short one. Mrs. Tilly had chased the horned torment too many summer evenings herself to blame anyone else for lingering, and was only thankful as she waited that she had Sylvia nowadays to give such valuable assistance. The good woman suspected that Sylvia loitered occasionally on her own account. There never was such a child for straying about out of doors since the world was made. Everybody said that it was a good change for a little maid who had tried to grow for 8 years in a crowded manufacturing town. But as for Sylvia herself, it seemed as if she'd never been alive at all before she came to live at the farm. She thought often with wistful compassion of a wretched geranium that belonged to a town neighbor. Afraid of folks, old Mrs. Tilly said to herself with a smile after she had made the unlikely choice of Sylvia from her daughter's household of children, and was returning to the farm. "Afraid of folks," they said. "I guess she won't be troubled, no great, with 'em up to the old place." When they reached the door of the lonely house and stopped to unlock it, and a cat came to purr loudly and rub against them, a deserted pussy indeed, but fat with young robins, Sylvia whispered that this was a beautiful place to live in, and she should never wish to go home. The companions followed the shady wood road, the cow taking slow steps and the child very fast ones. The cow stopped long at the brook to drink, as if the pasture were not half a swamp, and Sylvia stood still and waited, letting her bare feet cool themselves in the shoal water, while the great twilight moths struck softly against her. She waited on through the brook as the cow moved away, and listened to the thrushes with a heart that beat fast with pleasure. There was a stirring in the great boughs overhead. They were full of little birds and beasts that seemed to be wide awake and going about their world, or else saying good night to each other in sleepy twitters. Sylvia herself felt sleepy as she walked along. However, it was not much farther to the house, and the air was soft and sweet. She was not often in the woods so late as this, and it made her feel as if she were part of the gray shadows and the moving leaves. She was just thinking how long it seemed since she first came to the farm a year ago, and wondering if everything went on in the noisy town just the same as when she was there. The thought of the great red faced boy who used to chase and frighten her made her hurry along the path to escape from the shadows of the tree. Suddenly, the little woods girl was horror stricken to hear a clear whistle not very far away. Not a bird's whistle, which would have a sort of friendliness, but a boy's whistle, determined and somewhat aggressive. Sylvia left the cow to whatever sad fate might await her and stepped discreetly aside into the bushes, but she was just too late. The enemy had discovered her and called out in a very cheerful and persuasive tone, "Hello, little girl. How far is it to the road?" And trembling, Sylvia answered almost inaudibly, "A good ways." She did not dare to look boldly at the tall young man who carried a gun over his shoulder, but she came out of her bush and again followed the cow while he walked alongside. "I've been hunting for some birds," the stranger said kindly, "and I've lost my way, and I need a friend very much. Don't be afraid," he said gallantly. "Speak up, tell me what your name is, and whether you think I can spend the night at your house and go out gunning early in the morning." Sylvia was more alarmed than before. Would not her grandmother consider her much to blame? But who could have foreseen such an accident as this? It did not seem to be her fault, and she hung her head as if the stem of it were broken, but managed to answer Sylvie with much effort when her companion again asked her name. Mrs. Tilly was standing in the doorway when the trio came into view. The cow gave a loud moo by way of explanation. "Yes, you'd better speak up for yourself, you old trial. Where'd she tuck herself away this time, Sylvie?" But Sylvia kept an awed silence. She knew by instinct that her grandmother did not comprehend the gravity of the situation. She must be mistaking the stranger for one of the farmer lads of the region. The young man stood, his gun beside the door, and dropped a lumpy game bag beside it. Then he bade Mrs. Tilly good evening and repeated his wayfarer's story and asked if he could have a night's lodging. "Put me anywhere you like," he said. "I must be off early in the morning before day, but I'm very hungry indeed. You can give me some milk at any rate, that's plain." "Dear sakes, yes," responded the hostess, whose long slumbering hospitality seemed to be easily awakened. "You might fare better if you went out to the main road a mile or so, but you're welcome to what we've got. I'll milk right off, and you can make yourself at home." "You can sleep on husks or feathers," she proffered graciously. "I raise them all myself. There's good pasturing for geese just below here toward the mash. Now step round and set a plate for the gentleman, Sylvie." And Sylvia promptly stepped. She was glad to have something to do, and she was hungry herself. It was a surprise to find so clean and comfortable a little dwelling in this New England wilderness. The young man had known the horrors of its most primitive housekeeping and the dreary squalor of that level of society which does not rebel at the companionship of hens. This was the best thrift of an old fashioned farmstead, though on such a small scale that it seemed like a hermitage. He listened eagerly to the woman's quaint talk. He watched Sylvia's pale face and shining gray eyes with ever growing enthusiasm, and insisted that this was the best supper he had eaten for a month, and afterward the new made friends sat down in the doorway together while the moon came up. Soon it would be berry time, and Sylvia was a great help at picking. The cow was a good milker, though a plaguey thing to keep track of, the hostess gossiped frankly, adding presently that she had buried 4 children. So Sylvia's mother and a son, who might be dead in California, were all the children she had left. "Dan, my boy, was a great hand to go gunning," she explained sadly. "I never wanted for partridges or gray squirrels while he was at home. He's been a great wanderer, I expect, and he's no hand to write letters. There, I don't blame him. I'd have seen the world myself if I'd been so I could. Sylvia takes after him, the grandmother continued affectionately, after a minute's pause. There ain't a foot of ground she don't know her way over, and the wild creatures count her one of themselves. Squirrels she'll tame to come and feed right out of her hands, and all sorts of birds. Last winter she got the jaybirds to banding here, and I believe she'd have scanted herself out of her own meals to have plenty to throw out amongst 'em if I hadn't kept watch. Anything but crows, I tell her. I'm willing to help support, though Dan, he'd have tamed one of them, did seem to have reason same as folks. It was around here a good spell after he went away. Dan and his father, they didn't itch, and he never held up his head agin after Dan had dared him and gone off. The guest did not notice this hint of family sorrows and his eager interest in something else. So Sylvie knows all about birds, does she? He exclaimed, as he looked around at the little girl who sat very demure but increasingly sleepy in the moonlight. I'm making a collection of birds myself. I've been at it ever since I was a boy. Mrs. Tilly smiled. There are 2 or 3 very rare ones I've been hunting for these 5 years. I mean to get them on my own ground if they can be found. Do you cage 'em up? Asked Mrs. Tilly doubtfully, in response to this enthusiastic announcement. Oh no, they're stuffed and preserved. Dozens and dozens of them, said the ornithologist. And I've shot or snared every one myself. I caught a glimpse of a white heron a few miles from here on Saturday, and I've followed it in this direction. They've never been found in this district at all. The little white heron, it is, and he turned again to look at Sylvia with the hope of discovering that the rare bird was one of her acquaintances. But Sylvia was watching a hop-toad in the narrow footpath. You would know the heron if you saw it, the stranger continued eagerly. A queer, tall white bird with soft feathers and long, thin legs. It would have a nest perhaps in the top of a high tree, made of sticks, something like a hawk's nest. Sylvia's heart gave a wild beat. She knew that strange white bird, and had once stolen softly near where it stood in some bright green swamp grass, away over at the other side of the woods. There was an open place where the sunshine always seemed strangely yellow and hot, where tall, nodding rushes grew, and her grandmother had warned her that she might sink in the soft black mud underneath and never be heard of more. Not far beyond were the salt marshes, and just this side of the sea itself, which Sylvia wondered and dreamed much about, but never had seen, whose great voice could sometimes be heard above the noise of the woods in the stormy nights. I can't think of anything I should like so much as to find that heron's nest, the handsome stranger was saying. I would give $10 to anybody who could show it to me, he added desperately, and I mean to spend my whole vacation hunting for it if need be. Perhaps it was only migrating, or had been chased out of its own region by some bird of prey. Mrs. Tilly gave amazed attention to all this, but Sylvia still watched the toad, not divining as she might have done at some calmer time that the creature wished to get to its hole under the doorstep, and was much hindered by the unusual spectators at that hour of the evening. No amount of thought that night could decide how many wished-for treasures the $10, so lightly spoken of, would buy. And we're going to pause here, and we'll continue with this story in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.